A sudden roar cuts through the cold morning air as a shadow streaks across the sky, moving faster than the eye can follow. In the distance, a series of flashes lights up the horizon, and moments later, a shockwave ripples outward across barren fields. This was the moment that captured global attention, a Ukrainian fighter jet executing a precise and devastating strike on a cluster of Russian military positions. The footage rippled across international media within hours, sparking debates, strategic analysis, and intense political conversations about what this strike means for the broader war. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Conflict Front Stories channel. Please subscribe and like my videos. Today, we break down the story behind this dramatic operation, exploring the events leading up to the strike, the aircraft involved, the tactical decisions made in the air and on the ground, and what this means for the evolving conflict. Join me as we step into both the exterior battlefield environment and the interior control rooms where decisions are being made in real time. The story begins at sunrise, when Ukrainian surveillance drones were already hovering high above contested territory. These unmanned systems had been gathering data for hours, watching for movement, tracking changes, identifying equipment buildups, and trying to understand patterns in Russian logistics. Every detail mattered: which roads were being used for transport, how troops were rotating, where armored vehicles were positioned. Analysts noticed something that stood out: a concentration of Russian equipment in an area that had been relatively quiet over previous days. It was a gathering point, likely preparing for a push, and Ukrainian command understood the risks immediately. If that buildup was allowed to continue, it could transform into a significant offensive. Inside a dimly lit operations center deep within Ukrainian-held territory, officers reviewed the incoming footage. The interior of the room was filled with screens showing live feeds, heat signatures, map overlays, and communication channels. The officers spoke in short, concise exchanges, the type of communication used by teams that have trained together under pressure for months. One officer pointed to the precise coordinates, another recommended an air operation, and a third confirmed that weather conditions were optimal for an immediate strike. Within minutes, the decision was made. The strike had to be executed before the window closed and Russian forces repositioned. Outside, on an airfield surrounded by camouflage netting and hardened structures, a single Ukrainian fighter jet was prepared for takeoff. The exterior environment was cold, the sky dim, and the ground crew moved quickly and quietly. The jet chosen for this mission was equipped for rapid precision engagement, carrying the exact type of ordnance suited for neutralizing fortified positions without prolonged engagement. The pilot, already briefed on the mission, climbed the ladder, strapped in, and initiated the startup sequence. The engines ignited with a deep rumble that grew into a thunderous roar. The aircraft rolled down the runway and ascended into the sky, disappearing into the clouds within seconds. As the jet approached the target sector, the pilot maintained radio silence except for essential updates. On the ground, the operations center tracked the aircraft using encrypted channels. The interior team watched its progress as it navigated toward the target area, staying low enough to avoid detection yet high enough to maintain visual coverage. Modern warfare demanded a balance between stealth and tactical advantage, and this pilot understood that perfectly. Above the battlefield, the landscape came into view through the cockpit canopy. Smoke trails from previous artillery exchanges lingered in the distance. The Russian positions below appeared as a cluster of armored vehicles, supply trucks, and temporary shelters. Ukrainian intelligence had predicted this would be a staging point, and now the pilot could see how accurately the analysts had read the field. The operation had one primary goal: disrupt this buildup, degrade Russian mobility, and send a message that attempts to mass forces in this area would not go unnoticed. The pilot lined up the approach, checking coordinates, verifying the lock, and preparing for release. A single pass was all that was needed. The jet descended slightly, achieving optimal angle, and then the munitions dropped away silent for a moment, then accelerating downward. On impact, bright flashes erupted, sending dust and debris outward. Even from the cockpit, the shockwave was visible as a ripple spreading across the ground. Russian equipment scattered, movements halted, and the entire position was thrown into immediate disarray. The pilot pulled away, gaining altitude and turning sharply to exit the engagement zone. Russian air defenses attempted to respond, but the strike had been timed precisely to exploit a weak point in their radar coverage. Before they could track the jet effectively, it had already vanished behind cloud cover and was heading back toward Ukrainian airspace. The exterior landscape grew smaller beneath the aircraft as the mission shifted from engagement to extraction. Back inside the operations center, officers watched the feed with a mix of relief and focus. Celebration didn't exist in these rooms, only confirmation. Analysts reviewed the impact data sent by drones that had remained overhead throughout the mission. Damage assessments were conducted rapidly: how many vehicles were disabled, whether ammunition stores had been hit, whether the strike forced Russian forces to retreat or reposition. The interior environment was intense, but the voices remained calm. They were accustomed to absorbing information and updating strategy moment by moment. Within hours, news outlets across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East picked up the story. Satellite images, eyewitness accounts, and official statements from both sides began circulating online. Ukraine highlighted the strike as proof of its continued capability to conduct precision operations even under pressure. Russia attempted to downplay the impact, though independent observers noted the visible consequences of the strike in the footage. Military analysts debated what this meant for the frontline. Was it a sign of renewed Ukrainian activity in this sector? Was it a warning to Russian commanders? Or was it part of a larger series of pre-land operations designed to disrupt supply lines? On the ground near the front line, Ukrainian forces took advantage of the disruption. Units advanced cautiously, not as part of a major offensive, but as a tactical maneuver to secure better positions. Exterior footage from the region showed troops adjusting their defenses, monitoring any Russian reaction, and preparing for possible countermeasures. The strike had bought time, a rare commodity in a war defined by rapid shifts and constant pressure. Inside Ukrainian military leadership rooms, short interior briefings continued throughout the day. Officers discussed how Russian forces were responding, whether reinforcements were moving in, and what secondary operations could follow. The strike was not an isolated event. It was part of a broader chessboard where each move created new opportunities and new risks. The decision makers were constantly trying to stay 3 steps ahead while managing limited resources. Days later, analysts began to publish deeper assessments of the operation. They noted that the effectiveness of the strike was not just about the explosion itself, but the coordination behind it. The drone surveillance, the timing, the rapid decision-making, the pilot's execution, and the broader strategy that shaped the mission. They pointed out that such operations reflect the evolving nature of the conflict, where air power, intelligence, and adaptability determine success more than sheer numbers. Experts also questioned how Russia would adapt. Would they disperse their forces to avoid presenting large targets? Would they strengthen air defense networks in the region? Would this strike push them to shift their supply routes or reconsider their planning for upcoming operations? The war has shown repeatedly that every event triggers a response, and every response reshapes the battlefield. For Ukraine, the strike became symbolic of resilience. Even as the conflict dragged on, even as pressures mounted, even as international debates continued, this operation showed that Ukrainian forces still possessed both capability and intent. The footage of the jet soaring overhead releasing its payload, and returning safely became a moment that circulated widely among supporters online. It served as a reminder that the conflict was far from static. Every day brought new developments, new risks, and new strategic plays. Throughout this story, we return to the central idea. The exterior battlefield and the interior decision rooms are connected. What happens on the ground shapes decisions in command centers, and what happens in those command centers shapes the actions of pilots, soldiers, and drone operators. The strike was not just a pilot pressing a button, it was the result of dozens of people analyzing data, making judgments, coordinating timing, and trusting each other's ability to act under pressure. As the fighter jet finally landed back at its airfield, ground crews rushed out to guide it in. The pilot stepped out, exhausted but composed. There were no dramatic moments, no grand gestures, just a quiet acknowledgement that the mission had been completed. Debriefing began almost immediately inside a small interior briefing room, where the pilot described the conditions, the timing, and any anomalies encountered during the operation. These details would help refine future missions and improve tactics. The broader significance of the strike will continue to be discussed by military observers for weeks. Some will see it as a tactical victory, others as a symbolic message, others as a turning point that may influence morale and strategy on both sides. The truth, as always in war, is complex. The operation mattered not only for the physical damage it caused, but for the psychological and strategic shockwaves it sent across the conflict. In the end, this was more than just a fighter jet delivering a strike. It was a demonstration of coordination, timing, and the ongoing evolution of modern conflict. It showed how a single well-executed mission can influence momentum, disrupt enemy planning, and shape the battlefield far beyond the immediate blast zone. It also highlighted the risks pilots take every time they take to the sky, the pressure analysts face as they interpret data in real time, and the rapidly shifting landscape of a war that continues to change day by day. Thank you for watching this detailed breakdown of the operation. If you want more deep dive explanations of major events, frontline updates, and calm, clear analysis of developing situations, make sure you subscribe and like my videos. Your support helps this channel continue bringing accurate and balanced coverage from conflict front stories. Stay tuned for the next update as we continue to follow the evolving dynamics of this conflict with clarity and perspective.